They have a combined 12 years in the National Football League. They combined for 65 career sacks, 232 tackles, 1 Pro Bowl selection, and 1 Employee of the Month award.
That's just a straight shooter with upper management written all over him.
It's Train and Grose on the All AZ Podcast Network.
Welcome in episode 77, Train and Grose. Bertrand Berry, Mike Grose, Sean Crespin. Thanks for joining us again this week. Fellas, on remote again. I miss seeing you in person, but glad we could connect here. I'm still in beautiful Laramie, Wyoming. I think I'm going to get a job with the Chamber of Commerce. B-Train, before you dialed in, I was telling Sean all the beautiful things about Laramie, Wyoming, and maybe they'll put me on the payroll next time. Or maybe they want to sponsor the podcast in the future, something like that.
Hey, I'm all for it, brother. Anything that gets publicity for the show, I'm all for it. So you seem to have an affinity for Wyoming, and they seem to like having you around. So it seems like a match made in heaven to me.
Absolutely. 2 weeks in a row, I ate vegetarian in Wyoming, of all places, where there's probably more cattle per capita than there are people. But I had vegetarian again for one of my meals, and I enjoyed it. I liked it. I'm not ready to go all in, as I was telling you guys, but it was good. It was a nice change, and I highly recommend it.
That's what's up. Hey, I'm going to have to check it out because you talk so highly of it. I'm going to have to at least taste it so I can have an opinion one way or the other because I've never had anything vegan to date. So I'm taking your word for it, and I'm going to trust you, brother.
All right, here we go. Episode 77, B-Train. 2 names jumped out at me. Of course, the all-time great Red Grange, number 77. But we'll go, for the purposes of our show, again, I always like to get a contemporary of yours, somebody that you could probably tell us a quick story about, maybe somebody you competed against. And it's a guy by the name of Willie Roaf, number 77, of course. Played most of those years with the Saints, wrapped it up with the Kansas City Chiefs. Willie Roaf.
Willie Roaf, Hall of Famer Willie Roaf. And Mike, I know you remember this story because I told it when I first opened my business. I told the story about Willie Roaf when he was with the Saints in 1998. He was blocking, for a guy that didn't get a lot of fanfare in the NFL, but in college, he was quite the quarterback. And all I can say is in 1998, Willie Roaf taught me a valuable lesson. He used to literally wear specs underneath his helmet. And I thought to myself, anybody that's wearing specs cannot block me. And when I tell you in 1998 in the RCA Dome, he whooped my ass. He gave me a crash course on never underestimating your opponent. And from that moment on, I was never, ever taking anybody lightly who wore glasses because Willie Roaf, I didn't even sniff the quarterback, and I can't remember his name, but he was a quarterback from Florida that won the Heisman Trophy in '96. I'm drawing a blank right now, but when I tell you he was a guy that I thought was going to be barbecue chicken, I was the only thing rotisserie on that day because I didn't sniff him, and I was able to get a little get back once he got to Kansas City, and I was in Denver, but I will never forget how Willie Roaf whooped my ass in that 1998 matchup in the RCA Dome when I was with the Indianapolis Colts.
You talking about Danny Werfel, the quarterback?
Danny Werfel, there he is. Danny Werfel. Danny Werfel won the Heisman at the University of Florida. Was not a great quarterback in the NFL. I thought I was going to have at least one, maybe two hits on him, but I'm telling you, I didn't even see his jersey all day because all I saw was 77 laying on top of me most of it.
Was he a talker too, on top of everything else?
Willie didn't say anything. Willie was as athletic as you could find, a left tackle, a guy that could move with you, he could mirror you. He was a big guy, but he didn't want to do anything past his job. I got nothing but love and respect for Willie. He was a great tackle, worthy of the Hall of Fame, and I thank him to this day because he showed me that no matter what the opponent looks like, you better know if they're in the NFL, they're in the NFL for a reason.
Absolutely. All right, B-Train, jumping into the NBA, we got a couple stories we want to look at. first, I guess we'll start, not that there was any local aspect to this as far as the Phoenix Suns were concerned, but the NBA held its draft last week, a week ago Thursday. We're recording this on June the 29th, so about a week ago. And the one thing that I guess we can say, as I said, the Suns, I don't even know if they had anybody in the building because they didn't have any picks. But your team, the Houston Rockets, and my team, the Detroit Pistons, according to the so-called experts, fared pretty well. They improved their lot in the NBA. Now, they're still a long way from being mentioned in the same breath. In your case with the Rockets, those contenders in the Western Conference, I think it's a little bit easier in the East for the Pistons, but they were awful again this year. So we'll see if they did anything. But, hope springs eternal, and everybody's happy after the draft when they get the infusion of new talent.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited for what we were able to do and what you guys were able to do in Detroit. Obviously, had one of my favorite players in the entire draft, and Jaden Ivey. And Mike, you sent me the video of the Detroit Pistons and what they were able to do for Jaden Ivey, recognizing his whole family. One of the coolest things I've ever seen. And I'm not even going to lie, I got teary-eyed just thinking about it, because to go that far to show your support for a guy that hasn't dribbled a ball yet for your organization, but to give him that kind of love and to have those type of ties to a city already, it almost felt like destiny for him to be in Detroit, and couldn't be happier for him and his mother, who is a good friend of mine, Niel. And I know that when you do something like that for a young man, to make him feel special and make him feel wanted, he's going to give everything in his power to make sure that he makes good on bringing a winner to Detroit. I thought it was a brilliant move by the Pistons to do that, and it just came off super, super cool.
Yeah, if you missed it, he was drafted by the Pistons, and his family ties go deep to Detroit. His mother, as you mentioned, played for the Detroit Shock when they had a WNBA franchise. His father is from the Detroit area, played high school football at Detroit Country Day, which is a suburban school just outside of Detroit. And then the coolest thing for me, anyways, because I remember his grandfather playing for the Detroit Lions, James Hunter, a guy who got the nickname of Hound Dog because he would always find the ball. I forget, it was a ridiculous number of interceptions that he had during his playing career with the Detroit Lions. And they presented Jaden with each of those jerseys, as you said, before they actually gave him his own Detroit jersey. And you're absolutely right, a class act all the way by the Detroit Pistons. And like you, I don't have obviously any connection to the family, but just very cool, very, very well done. And I think it was tough for Jaden himself because he was so emotional anyways. If you saw the draft as it happened live, he could barely speak when he was sitting down with ESPN. His mom did a lot of the talking when they were sitting on the couch. And, he had the tissue in hand and, talking about reaching his dream and that sort of thing. And then I think the following day when he got into there with Detroit, it was even more so, the family history and things like that. And I thought it was cool. Jalen Rose, he tried to get in and get himself an invite to grandma's house for dinner because his grandmother still lives in the Detroit area. And, just a cool thing all the way around because you get so jaded when it comes to these things, the business side of sports and the process, I guess, for lack of a better term. So to see it humanized the way it was with this particular pick and this particular player and his history and his family, I just thought it was very cool, very well done by the Detroit Pistons.
It really was, Mike. And I feel like when you have that type of synergy going in, I think only good things can happen going forward. And again, I can't say enough about how invested he's going to be into the Detroit Pistons organization because they showed him love in a way that most players don't. Yeah, it's one thing to give you a jersey and to take the pictures and to smile with the owner and to smile with the head coach, but to go that far and to present the jerseys on top of it. I mean, the history that goes along with that and to tug at his heartstrings like that, I thought it was a great move. And I'm telling you, Jaden's going to go out there and he's going to give Detroit everything that he can because he knows that that's home for him and it's home for his family. And he doesn't want to let the home team down.
No, absolutely. the other thing I was going to mention, and I thought I did a nice job with the coverage. And at first, I was worried when they were going to overdo the whole new thing. But the way it played out, and the way Scott Perry, who's the general manager for it, played it out, where they basically traded things away. I mean, the Knicks clearly they're on a plan that doesn't include the upcoming season. Shed some salary. They had to get some things right, but they had Stephen A. Smith and Spike Lee on set for the Knicks pick, and then to come to find out, but those guys saw it happen live. I just thought it was good theater. To see the way it.
Yeah, it was good theater, and I think for ESPN and the way that they're doing things now, and the way that the draft coverage has grown exponentially since even when I was coming out 25 years ago. My goodness, there's been so many improvements, and the way that they handled each and every situation, especially with these young men and giving them the most coverage possible. They do a great job in making it an event. I mean, just think about how the draft used to be, Mike, before me and in the early 90s and the late 80s. I mean, it was really nothing to be put on TV. I mean, it was just a whole bunch of people in a room, on the phone, and you'd hear your name, and that was about the end of it. But now they've got so many graphics, so many ways to and highlights of what each guy did, and the breakdown and the analysis of all these different guys. It's very impressive how they've made these drafts a production, and these guys have become famous. These players have become famous before they even step on the court for their respective teams. It's a beautiful thing, but then they've got to go out and they've got to live up to all that hype too.
Yeah, well, that's true. You got that expectation when you get put on the world. The other, if you look at it for the draft by school, man, Duke is still, aren't they? I mean, they have 5 picks, I believe, in this draft, and they own it. And Nevsky come on after, I think it was the pick of Paulo Banchero, and congratulatory speech to him right there. Speaking of the production value, but yeah, 5 players from Duke selected 58 players last week.
Yeah, they taking the place of Kentucky. You remember a few years ago, Kentucky used to be that team that used to have all types of players littered throughout the draft, and now you see the Duke Blue Devils making another appearance. And you even go back to the Zion Williamson draft. There was a few guys then. I believe there was like 3 or 4 taken that year. But Coach K did a great job of really building that program to where it is, and you can't help but be impressed with the caliber players that he's able to produce out of that school and to go in and be very productive.
Hey, B-Train, let's do this. Let's step aside for a minute. We'll reset, come back, and we'll get more into the NBA free agency started. That's coming up on Train and Gross.
Train and Gross.
Welcome back in, Train and Gross. Follow us on Twitter at Train and Gross. Just that easy. Hey, B-Train, before the break, we were talking about the NBA. The draft just concluded. Free agency getting ready to get heated up. It starts tomorrow. We're recording this on Wednesday. And, big news locally, of course, here in Arizona, the Suns tendered DeAndre Ayton, the man who does not deserve a nickname. And so he now has that tender offer, but that's it. And what that does, I think most people agree, is just opens up a window for the Suns, DeAndre Ayton, to resolve this however it's going to play out, whether that means he gets a deal, some sort of longer-term deal that he can live with from the Suns. Maybe it's a sign and trade, who knows. But at least the first step has been taken with the Suns tendering DeAndre Ayton.
Mike, I really believe that this is the beginning of the Suns saying, hey, we can do this without you. And we would love to have you in the mix, but you're not going to be in the mix at a price that you like. It's going to be at a price that we want, because as we've talked about really ad nauseum since the season ended, he came up small when it mattered most. And you're not going to pay a franchise max to a guy that's really the 4th option on his team. And I understand he was a number one pick, and I understand that big men are hard to find. But, Mike, I'm struggling to find what DeAndre Ayton does really well, what he does at an elite level. Does he play with his back to the basket at an elite level? No. Is he an elite passer? No. Is he an elite defender? No. Is he an elite offensive guy? Can you just throw him the ball and he's going to get you 25, 30 bucket points per game? No. So I keep looking at how he fares against a lot of the big men in today's NBA, Joel Embiid, Nikola Jokic, and I started looking at even the defensive guys. What does he do really well? And to me, if you don't do anything really well, then why do we have to pay you like somebody that does everything really well?
Right. No, and that's a great point. And I think you layer in on top of that, the year ended for DeAndre Ayton, the public blow up, if you will, embarrassment with the coach, that has to factor into things. It has to factor into what the Suns are thinking, and other people see that and know that if they are interested in DeAndre Ayton, they can do it from a position of where they might have the upper hand from a bargaining standpoint. And so, all these things I think play into it. But as I said, this is just kind of the first step in terms of how this plays out. I forget what the number was, 17 and change, I think, is the tender number for DeAndre Ayton in terms of that. Other guys around the league, when you look at what happened, big number, and Sean and I were talking about this when we were getting ready to do this. James Harden opted out of his deal with the Sixers, $47 million and change. That's a lot of money to walk away from. James Harden and his people must think that there's more money out there for him someplace else.
Well, I don't know if it's someplace else, Mike. I know the one thing that they need that defensive stopper. And the one guy that they've got their eyes on is P.J. Tucker. And P.J. Tucker for the last couple of years has been that missing piece to a lot of people's puzzle, and thinking that he can be the reason that they can really get over the hump, if you will, in the Eastern Conference. You saw him with the Milwaukee Bucks. Well, the Miami Heat beat the lost to the Milwaukee Bucks, and they're like, man, we could really use that guy. So they went and got P.J. Tucker. Well, the Philadelphia 76ers lost to the Miami Heat, and who was that guy that was really kind of that nuisance for the Miami Heat? That was P.J. Tucker. And think about the relationship that you had with front office and you had with James Harden and P.J. Tucker all out of Houston. There's relationship there. There's history there. And P.J. Tucker seems to always follow winning. And so I think they're trying to bring the band back together, so to speak, if you will, with James Harden and P.J. Tucker and the GM there. And I think they're going to make a play. And I think the only way that they could have fit him in there was for James Harden to not sign that free agent deal or that option, but to, lengthen his contract and get more money in the process. So I think he stays with Philly, but I think he gets like a 3-year deal, and then they make a deal to bring in P.J. Tucker.
We were talking about it last week, another name that made one of the first names with free agency, and that was Kyrie Irving. We thought that, he might be on the move, but lo and behold, he says, you know what? I'm going to opt in. I'm going to take my deal here and stay with the Nets.
Mike, he had no other choice. Let's just get that out the way. He was really trying to create a market for himself. And in the process, I think he alienated a lot of people. And most importantly, Kevin Durant was a guy that took the high road. He didn't say anything publicly, but at home and amongst his friends and people that he trusts, he's got to be saying, man, what do I got to do to get this guy on board? He asked me to come to Brooklyn with him, not to Madison Square Garden. And ever since we've gotten here, he has been an absolute headache. So if I'm Kevin Durant, I'm at my wit's end. And for him to drag this out the way that he did, nobody really thought he was going to the LA Lakers for $30 million less than what he was going to get had he opted into his contract. Nobody's that dumb. He had already lost $17 million last year for not playing. You're not going to lose another 30 for just to go somewhere else and think that you're going to get long-term money on the back end of it. That's just dumb. And I think a lot of people would have really given him the side eye had he really opted out of that deal. So I don't think there was any choice. And now he's going to have to go back to that locker room and re-ingratiate himself to a lot of guys that, quite frankly, I'm sure some of them feel some kind of way about him behind closed doors. They may not say it publicly, but they're feeling some kind of way about Kyrie Irving.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And, because he was in the headlines making news and getting attention for really all the wrong reasons for a team that had so much said and written about it before the start of last season. To have it end the way that it did, you're 100% correct on that one. So again, this is the time, right? Right after the draft, this is the time where we start to see these things shake out, and teams make moves to make financial moves, because the draft, you get these young guys for a price that you can work with, and then fill in the holes around, right? And that's going back to what I was saying about the New York Knicks, like they were moving pieces around, they were making draft picks for other teams so that they could shed some salary. Now it's interesting to see, once free agency starts on the 30th, how they bolster and how they build it up, and what they can do, and how teams can bring it back home. How our Phoenix Suns, and we talked about it last week, they're already going to be way over the threshold to pay that luxury tax. Robert Sarver is going to be writing a check. And so, again, this DeAndre Ayton situation is going to play into that. And then some of the other business that they have to take care of with guys currently on the roster before they can go out and even make some additions to hopefully improve or to solidify this team. Perhaps a backup point guard. If you do move DeAndre, what do you do in the front court? But again, things that you have to get done, all with an eye on the checkbook that the owner is going to have to write when the bill comes due from the end.
Yeah, I look at this Western Conference, Mike, that the Phoenix Suns are in, and the road just got that much harder, because you got teams that were not healthy that are going to be healthy this year. You've got teams like the Clippers who are adding a John Wall to an already loaded roster. They're going to be one of the deeper rosters that you will see in all the basketball. Of course, you got the defending champions. The Golden State Warriors aren't going anywhere. You got the Dallas Mavericks who are going to be there, the Memphis Grizzlies. There's going to be a lot of different teams, Minnesota Timberwolves. There's so many teams, Mike, that are going to be competitive in the Western Conference. I just wonder, has the door already closed on the championship run for the Phoenix Suns? Will they be able to sustain this excellence with the depth of the Western Conference that seems to be getting even deeper by the day as more guys are getting healthy?
Well, and I believe Sean Crespin asked us that question a couple of weeks ago and pumped the brakes when the Suns kind of were unceremoniously dumped by the Dallas Mavericks. And I think it's a legitimate question because, again, you look at one of your stars, he's going to be going on 38 years old, and he obviously wore down during the postseason. You got the unresolved situation with DeAndre Ayton, and how does that play out, whether he's here on a number with, to your point, does he move on, and what do you get in return, and how do you build and fill in around that? So lots of questions. And I think you're right. I mean, you look up and down the Western Conference, and I kind of made that point earlier when I was talking about the draft, and what a nice draft that the Pistons and the Rockets had. I think for the Pistons in the Eastern Conference, the climb up is a little bit easier than it is for the Houston Rockets. The Rockets had a wonderful draft, but man, they're going tooth and nail into this Western Conference. We haven't even talked about teams like Memphis. Like Ja Morant's going to get his deal. That's coming. He's getting paid this offseason. And what about New Orleans? What do you do if you're the New Orleans Hornets with Zion Williamson? He's played 50-some-odd games the last couple of years. So much potential, but do you bank the potential, or do you maybe make a deal and give Willie Green some concrete solution to work with going forward? But again, these are all those questions in the Western Conference. Nobody's taken a step back. It just seems like it gets stronger and stronger, and the Suns are going to have to do something. The flip side of that is, we love the head coach, and I think James Jones, for my money, has earned the right to retool and do what he has to do and put the best product forward come this fall.
I really believe that this team is a likable team, Mike. It's a team that plays well. They play together. They play with a sense of purpose, and it's unquestioned who the leaders are on this team. And I think when you start with the head coach, Monty Williams has done a terrific job. I'm biased towards Monty Williams. I'm unapologetically biased as a fellow Domer. And I look at Chris Paul and Devin Booker. Those guys are the co-captains. They're the ones that run the whole show. Everything goes through them. And the pieces that they put around those two individuals, I think, have been masterful. And James Jones deserves the credit. And I think if they're able to really run this team back, so to speak, and maybe add a piece here and there, I think they're going to be right in the thick of it again next year. But, Mike, I'm telling you, there's going to be so many more characters to have to go through than what they did in the last 2 seasons, because the NBA had a lot of injuries to deal with the last couple of years coming out of the pandemic and whatnot, and now you're going to see these teams at full strength. I can't wait to see how both these conferences play out.
Yeah, I think that's entirely true. Free agency starts this week, and we'll talk, I'm sure, coming up next week when we get together to record. All right, we'll step aside here. On the other side, B-Train, I've got some just news and notes from around the world of sports. We'll run through that quickly and get your thoughts on those. And then on the other side of that, it's what everybody tunes in for anyways. We got Pump the Brakes and Dad Jokes. That's coming up on Train and Gross.
Train and Gross.
Welcome back in, Train and Gross. Rolling along, episode 77. And a couple things, news and notes-wise, B-Train. We'll run through it real quick and just kind of kick around a couple topics here and there. We always start in the NFL. Before we get to some of the other things we're going to talk about, I got to ask you, Le'Veon Bell, Adrian Peterson, both retired, both out of the league. Now they're going to take up boxing. They got a boxing match coming up. What do you think about former players turning to boxing, turning to MMA? What is it, money? Stay relevant? What is it?
I don't know, but I don't like it. And I think for both of these individuals, they didn't have anything to prove. Adrian Peterson is going to the Hall of Fame as a football player. Le'Veon Bell had a very solid career. I don't know if he's got Hall of Fame numbers, but for the length of time that he needed, but he was definitely considered one of the top backs during his time. And so for them to do this, I'm all for staying in shape once you retire. You don't want to just stop being athletic and being active, but to do something like this, to go from one sport that you took your life into your own hands and did it at a very high level, to retire from that and then at an advanced age go to another sport that you take your life into your own hands, I just don't recommend it. And it does seem like a little bit of an attention getter, but if they're willing to do it, I mean, hopefully they understand that this is more exhibition than it is for real, and they're not trying to make a career out of it.
Yeah, I'm with you, probably for different reasons, but I'm with you. The attention piece feels about right in terms of what they're doing. How about this one? Kliff Kingsbury talking about the suspension of DeAndre Hopkins. And, man, Coach must be taking lessons in PR this offseason, because he's trying to spin a 6-game suspension as a good thing as they bring DeAndre Hopkins off the knee injury. I get it. I know you want to be careful when you're bringing somebody like DeAndre Hopkins off, but you can't spin this as a good thing. Missing 6 games is going to hurt this team. I mean, this is a team that's already got a ton of question marks, and he is the quarterback's, security blanket. And, you listen to Coach talking about, well, we're going to ease him in and he'll be on a pitch count during training camps because we want to take it easy on that knee. I think that's, if you're paying attention, there's no way you can spin this as a positive, a 6-game suspension for your best player, or one of your best players.
Mike, nothing has been really positive coming out of the Cardinals camp for some time now. If it wasn't with Kyler Murray and his situation, scrubbing the account and unhappy with his deal, then you have the Rodney Hudson situation, unexcused absence, and now you've got DeAndre Hopkins missing games, and the knee is not where it needs to be. It's just not a positive deal right now over at the Cardinals complex, and I'm just wondering what's really going on behind closed doors. And it seems like where there's smoke, there's fire. And I would love to give Kliff Kingsbury a truth serum and get his thoughts on what he really thinks about these situations. Because if you take any of these in an isolated situation, it's a big deal. Kyler Murray not happy with his money, that's a big deal. Your center, a guy that you just brought in and really one of the more important players on that offensive side of the ball, he's not willing to come to camp. That's a big deal. And then you got DeAndre Hopkins that's going to miss the first 6 games. And, oh, by the way, he's not 100% with that knee. That's a huge deal in and of itself because he's really your best player on offense. So your top 3 players on offense all have issues going on unrelated to each other. But it just seems like one big mess for the Arizona Cardinals right now.
Meanwhile, in Cleveland, the Deshaun Watson story is not any clearer. As we give an update on this week, apparently there was negotiations between the NFLPA and the league trying to come up with some agreement on a suspension. Those who have kind of the inside scoop in terms of where that went, the league was pushing for the 1-year suspension. The Players Association not going to give in on that, at least not yet. And so the situation remains murky at best. And then we talked about it a week ago. The attorney for several of the women that are suing him, they enjoined the Cleveland Browns. They brought them into the lawsuit, basically. And the Houston Texans. Watson's former team. So that's one of 2 things. One, they know that's going to force the issue because we've already talked about a lot on this podcast. NFL doesn't like to go to court. NFL doesn't like disclosure. So this might force the issue. But it really does open up the light in terms of how involved. We talked about the NDA that was given by the team to Watson, as he started to see the trouble. So the old saying, where there's smoke, there's fire. And it's seeming more and more that he's going to miss the entire year for the Cleveland Browns.
Well, Mike, the one thing that the NFL doesn't like to be is embarrassed. And I think right now with this situation, they're embarrassed about Deshaun Watson and some of the behavior that he put forth with 66 young women in a 17-month span. Mike, that's such a big number. It's hard to talk around that number. It's impossible to not look at him differently after you hear that number. And no matter what happens, he may not have been inappropriate with all of them, but the fact that there were that many people, it speaks to a whole nother issue that's for a whole nother podcast, Mike. But the fact that that there was embarrassment on behalf of Deshaun Watson towards the NFL and to be associated with this guy, and for Cleveland to not only overlook that, but then to give him the most guaranteed money in league history, it just makes you wonder what were the Cleveland Browns thinking? I mean, did they really think that he was going to be able to be eligible this year? Because you just don't give that kind of money to a guy that is going to have to sit out the very first year that he's going to be with the team. And the NFL always loves to have good theater and good drama, but I don't know if they want to go this far and get in bed with these type of situations. So I think maybe a half year to a year suspension is probably going to be what it is. And they're looking towards 2023 as opposed to what they can do here in 2022.
Meanwhile, college football recruiting news, Arch Manning, he decides on the University of Texas. Could have went where his uncle went, Mississippi, his grandfather, Mississippi, his other uncle, Tennessee. He's charting his own path, and he's going to be a Texas Longhorn.
Well, he stayed in the SEC, so that part he stayed true to the family ties. But I look at this is a but moment. Yeah, you sign Archie Manning, but is he really the top quarterback in that class? And is Archie Manning going to single-handedly now change fortune for the Texas Longhorns? Are they now a title contender in college football? I say no. So he's going to need a lot of help. Sarkisian is going to need a lot more talent around Archie Manning for this team to be competitive, because right now they're not ready for the Alabamas. They're not ready for the Georgias. They're not ready for the LSUs. They're not even ready for the Texas A&Ms, in my opinion. So they've still got a lot of work to do. Yes, he is a known name, and to have the same name as his grandpa, that goes a long way. But I don't know if this changes fortune for the University of Texas and all the money that they are able to throw at Archie or anybody else in order to build a winner. So we'll see how this plays out.
Going back to a story you brought up a couple weeks ago, B-Train, the NHL ratings way up all the way through the Stanley Cup Finals. The Colorado Avalanche dethroned the Tampa Bay Lightning. And you were back when you lived in Denver. That's back in the glory days for the Avs. 20-some years since their last title, the Cup returns to the Mile High City, and the TV ratings for ESPN ABC were outstanding.
Mike, I was glued to the TV. I found it captivating. I was riveted by the game in and of itself. And one of these days, you're going to have to sit me down for a couple hours and just teach me the game. Just teach me the nuances of hockey, because even though I didn't know all that was going on the ice, I could see the energy and I could see the drama, the back and forth, and you could the momentum was tangible. You could actually see it on TV how these teams were going back and forth. You saw the championship medal of Tampa Bay, but you saw the hunger of the Colorado Avalanche. And you're right. Back in 2001, I was there. I lived in Denver at the time, and I remember Ray Bork getting that trophy and him being so happy to finally get it. Well, the Stanley Cup has returned, and that puts a lot of pressure on the other Denver sports, because Denver's a great sports city. But the one thing that they're going to do is they're going to expect winners going forward. So the Broncos, the Rockies, and the Nuggets, they all better be on notice, because the Avalanche has gotten the job done, and now they're expecting the other sports to do the same.
It's so funny you say that, B-Train. I'm in Laramie, Wyoming right now, which is about 2.5 hours north of Denver. It's basically a suburb of Denver, I guess. But the bartender where we were the other night said the exact same thing that you did. He said, maybe now the Broncos, the Rockies, and the Nuggets will look and they'll follow the path that the Avalanche took. And you're right. I mean, Denver is a passionate sports town. And the bar has been set very high by the Colorado Avalanche. All right, Serena Williams. You look at, we talk, and I want to jump into Title IX a little bit. ESPN's been doing a really great job the last month or so talking about Title IX. But, Serena Williams, in terms of, how she and her sister changed the game of women's tennis, and just a remarkable effort, even though she came up on the short end of it over in the UK at Wimbledon. Just a remarkable individual performance by Serena Williams on her comeback.
Just a true warrior. And Mike, it's sad, but every athlete faces this reality that you can't do it like you used to do it. And for Serena, I watched a lot of this match. It was 3 hours long. It was captivating from start to finish. You saw her look completely out of sorts in the first set. Then she comes back. She's dominant, 6-1, and then it goes to the tiebreaker where they got to get 10 points at the end, and she just looked gassed at the end, Mike. She just looked like she just didn't have it, and this is what happens when you have older athletes that don't necessarily want to put in the work that it takes to be the former version of themselves. And I think for Serena, she's got a lot going on. She's got a family now. She's got a lot of business interests going on, and she's 40 years old. And there's no shame in bowing out in your 40s as a competitive tennis player. And there were times where it was kind of hard to watch, to be honest with you. I love Serena. I love her competitiveness. You saw her summon up that energy at times during the match. But overall, when you're losing to the 120 ranked player in tan, it doesn't look good. It's not great for the resume. And I think she's going to have to get back out there and put the work in order to regain that form that she had as one of the most dominant athletes in all of sports.
Well, I think it's a good segue into the last thing I wanted to talk about in the segment is Title IX. I think ESPN, and Sean, you brought this up, ESPN's done, I think over the last month or so, a really nice job of highlighting both on their website and on their broadcast Title IX, bringing stories around women's athletics. Title IX, of course, a federal law that came about in the 1970s. It had a lot to do not only with athletics, but just funding overall for education. But, really the spotlight goes to women's athletics. And as I said, ESPN gets knocked a lot for some of the things they do, but I think they did a marvelous job this month telling a lot of really great stories and sharing the history, the struggle of women's athletics over the last couple of decades.
Mike, isn't it interesting that this all came out while we had turmoil in our government where Roe versus Wade was overturned? When you talk about women's rights and abortion and all that, it just seemed to be that perfect storm where you had all of these great stories about women and overcoming adversity to get on the level playing field with men, and then you have such a landmark case be overturned by the Supreme Court. It just seems sad, and it felt wrong. It was almost a killjoy to be celebrating women in the way that ESPN and a lot of women around the world had been doing, and then you hear this story come out, with the Supreme Court. It just seems like, man, 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, and who would have thought that they'd have that cloud hanging over their head while they're doing such a masterful job of really celebrating what women have truly overcome in this nation's history.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And, unfortunately, you're right. It overshadowed everything that was happening as we celebrated it. And, I look at it as the father of two daughters who both played collegiate sports. One daughter still works in collegiate sports, coaching a women's team at an NCAA school, and know how important it was. But more importantly, you look at it, because sports is, for most people, it's just a vehicle to get to school, right? B-Train, this. You went from high school to Notre Dame and were able to parlay that into a nice career in the National Football League. Most people don't do that, but a lot of people go to college that otherwise wouldn't go to college, get an education because of their sport, whatever it is, right? And that was exclusively up until Title IX. That was a privilege given to men. And now, young women can excel in a sport, get a scholarship and attend college when maybe they wouldn't have been able to do that, continue to play a sport they love, and get their education paid for. And, for me, I think that as I look back on it, the impact, the importance of that, I think that was, to see ESPN celebrate it and talk about that. And most the WNBA, maybe some, tennis, golf, whatever, the numbers of women making a living at their sport is much smaller than men. And the men's number isn't huge anyways. So I think that to me is the really strong legacy for me as I think about Title IX.
Mike, I'll just go to the WNBA. I mean, before Title IX, there was no opportunity for women to be professional athletes and to play in a league where it's for women, by women. And look at how the WNBA has grown over the years. Yes, there's still work to be done, but I think that they've made tremendous strides, and you've seen female athletes come through and have great careers and be revered in the nation's annals as great athletes. I think about Elisa Leslie and to me, Cheryl Swoops. These they're pioneers. They were women that were looked at as some of the greatest players ever, whether it's men or women. And I would have loved to have seen some of the other women who didn't get a chance, like a Cheryl Miller, to have played in the WNBA and had her talents be put on full display for the world to see. She was way ahead of her time, and I love the fact that from Title IX, you've seen the birth of the WNBA in the late 90s and what it's become now, and the fact that there are so many different women that were able to have careers because of the groundwork that was laid with Title IX. And you just hate to see anything go against that, but without struggle, as they've said in the past, there is no progress.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, that's going to do it for this part of the Fine Podcast. We'll step aside here one more time. On the other side, Sean Crespin jumps in. We got Pump the Brakes, and then Dad Jokes. B-Train's on a nice little run here. We'll see if he can keep it going. That's coming up on Train and Grose. Welcome back in. Regular listeners to the podcast know the music. That means it's time for Pump the Brakes as we turn it over to Sean Crespin.
Thanks, guys. I'll throw out a handful of statements from the world of sports, maybe a little pop culture as well. And we will see where you guys land on that, whether you're pumping the brakes on it or if you're rolling with those statements. First one, you guys mentioned the whole Deshaun Watson situation in Cleveland. The other side of that coin, still in Cleveland, is one Baker Mayfield, who, by the way, had himself a quarterback camp in Norman, Oklahoma recently, and was obviously asked about this situation. He said, quote, this is about returning to Cleveland, he was asked about. He said, I think for that to happen, there would have to be some reaching out, but we're ready to move on. I think both sides are ready to move on. That might be all well and good, but pump the brakes or not, if Deshaun Watson is suspended, the Browns need to be on their knees begging Baker Mayfield to come back.
Pump the brakes. I'm going to put this out here, and I want to see what you guys think about this. The Cleveland Browns, if things go according to schedule with Deshaun Watson, they should trade for Jimmy Garoppolo. He's going to need a year to show himself as the quarterback that can really lead a team. If he's able to come in and be a fill gap or stopgap for a year and get the Cleveland Browns to the playoffs, I think that would only enhance his stock, and it solves the problem for two different franchises. The San Francisco 49ers can unload that deal, and then the Cleveland Browns can cut Baker Mayfield without any worries about that $18 million deal. They just eat that and move on. But I think Jimmy G would be a perfect stopgap for the Cleveland Browns if Deshaun Watson is indeed suspended for the season.
So I like where you went with that. Here's the only thing you got to keep in mind with this Cleveland Browns team. They can't trade for anybody or anything right now because they've got nothing to trade. It all belongs to the Texans. So that's where I don't know what you can offer the San Francisco 49ers for a Jimmy G when you just sent everything to the Texans to bring in Deshaun Watson.
But they may not have to, Sean, because I think the 49ers are just going to flat out release him eventually. They're going to, once he's able to throw the football, they're going to let him go on his merry way because I don't think teams are going to be silly enough to try to trade for a guy that they know the San Francisco 49ers really don't want.
Grose?
Going back to the initial question, I'm pumping the brakes like B-Train. No way Baker Mayfield is the starting plays quarterback at all.
But the statement was the Browns should get on their knees and beg Baker Mayfield to stick around or want to stick around or kiss and make up if you do lose a Deshaun Watson for the year. That's a statement. You still pumping the brakes?
Pumping the brakes. Pumping the brakes. You can't. That ain't going to work at all. And I, in theory, I like B-Train's idea. I mean, it does solve a lot of problems for both teams. But Sean, you raised a good point. The other thing that I have no idea, I didn't look it up. What's the cap implications for that kind of deal? Because if you release Baker, you're going to take a hit. If you bring Jimmy G in, what's that going to do? And so there's all kinds of things to work out. In theory, I think it makes sense. But in practice, the NFL, you got that cap that you got to work around. But to the original question, pump the brakes. Like, that ship has sailed, and I think Baker Mayfield was saying what everybody already knew when he was asked that question in Norman, Oklahoma.
So number 2, we're going to stay with quarterbacks in the NFL. We're going to go to second-year quarterbacks coming into this season. Justin Fields, Mac Jones, Trevor Lawrence, Davis Mills, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance. Of that list, Justin Fields will be the second-year player who makes the biggest leap this year. Pump the brakes or not?
I'm not pumping the brakes. I think if you are the Chicago Bears, you've got to put personnel around Justin Fields so that he can thrive. The one thing he did at Ohio State is when he had talent around him, he looked so much better. And you traded away Allen Robinson, or you let Allen Robinson walk free agent. I just wonder, who's he going to throw to in Chicago? If you don't get him the requisite weapons, how can he look good as a quarterback throwing the ball to average guys? He's a guy that, yes, he's got the ball in his hands and he's the most important player, but he's going to need playmakers around him in order to realize his full potential.
Grose?
Yeah, I'm all in on that one, pumping the brakes. Well, I'm pumping the brakes. I'm sorry. I think I disagree with B-Train. Chicago is a wasteland when it comes to quarterbacks, and they didn't do anything around or not nearly enough around him. If I had to take a quarterback off that list that you read, Sean, I'm going Trevor Lawrence. You look at how bad, and I don't think we knew how bad it was throughout the course of last year. So if there isn't any permanent damage to his psyche, I think Trevor Lawrence has a huge potential to make a big step forward this coming season.
I'd agree with that. And Trevor Lawrence was, and again, in my opinion, Justin Fields, I think has the most potential of anybody on that list. I thought that going into the draft last year as well. But I think right up there with Trevor Lawrence. But I agree with you, Grose. It was so bad in Jacksonville that it's hard to not picture Trevor Lawrence making that year 2 step. And Zach Wilson, let's be real. They've got it's the exact opposite problem in New York right now that Justin Fields is having in Chicago. There's a ton of weapons in New York right now around Zach Wilson. He's going to have to improve this year. I think under the injuries last year and everything else, there's some pressure, I think, on him to be that saving grace, if you will, in New York. And they do have the weapons around him. So it's going to be an intriguing list of second-year young quarterbacks in the NFL this year.
The thing
a lot
about
of pressure
Zach
on all
Wilson
those guys.
Yeah, and the thing about Zach Wilson is it can't be worse.
No.
So the only way he can go is up.
Yeah. In the NBA, going through a rebuild again in San Antonio, Greg Popovich reportedly will return for another year as head coach of the Spurs. Guys, he's 73 years old. The Spurs have not had a winning record since the 2018-19 season. They haven't won a playoff series since the 16-17 season. Pump the brakes or not, there's nothing left to prove. He's a top 5 coach all time on anybody's list. It's time for the Spurs and Pop to maybe go on their merry way.
Well, I'm going to partially pump the brakes because I do believe that Popovich does not have anything to prove in the NBA. His legacy is solidified.
Yeah.
Those 5 championships with Tim Duncan, but to say that he doesn't need to be there anymore. Remember, Pop lost his wife a few years ago, and you don't know what else Pop has in store.
It's true.
If he wants to continue to coach, being around that environment, that organization where he's going to feel nothing but love, if there's anybody that can still be applauded while in San Antonio, while they struggle, it's going to be Greg Popovich, because they know when he has players that can get it done, he's capable of bringing titles to San Antonio, and most people don't have the coaching acumen that he does to win in a small market like San Antonio. So I give Greg Popovich all the leeway he wants. If he wants to keep coaching for the next 3-4 years, he's earned that right.
Gross?
100% agree with B-Train on this one. When you look at where the Spurs are right now, it's not a Greg Popovich issue. In fact, I think the Spurs are the example of what the NBA likes to see in terms of the cyclical nature. You win championships, and then players get old, players retire, and then you got to rebuild, and that's where they're at right now. But when you look at the last couple of years, while you're 100% correct, Sean, in terms of the results, I don't think you can point to the situation in San Antonio and say the reason they haven't won a playoff series in so many years, or the reason they haven't had a winning record in so many years, is because of Greg Popovich. So if he wants to hang around and keep going, I'm all for it. I'm all for it. As long as he wants to go, he's earned that right.
Yeah, I completely agree with both of you guys on this one. But I do think it's one of those situations where you have to ask yourself, he's 73 years old. How much longer realistically will he be coaching? So though you don't ever want to see a Greg Popovich leave your building if you're an organization, you do have to have an idea or at least a plan in place with said coach who's 73 years old that, hey, I know you still feel like you can do it, but we do have to think long term. If there's any way we can start grooming somebody, if there's any way we can start to put together that plan, and I think he's probably the kind of guy you would do that with. You would allow him to take those steps, because if you're an organization, you do have to think long term. And you see 73 years old, and you think, okay, where are we going to be when he's 75? Because we're in the middle of a rebuild again.
And the other thing I want to say too is,
go ahead, B-Train.
Go ahead, Mike.
No, B-Train, go
ahead,
ahead.
Mike. No, I was just going to say they had a succession plan in place, but he was coaching the Celtics in the NBA Finals this past season. So I look at Ime Udoka, a guy that was a longtime assistant, and then there have been a few other assistants that have been able to move on and get head coaching jobs. So do they really want to move on from Pop, or were they willing to settle for some of those assistants, those lieutenants that have gone on to do great jobs in other locations? Maybe the cupboard is pretty bare other than Greg Popovich, because a lot of those guys have moved on. So there's a lot of different angles you can look at this at.
Grose, one last thought?
Yeah, to that I was just going to say, in the business world, and B-Train said it, you call it a succession plan. And the person that's filling the seat, Greg Popovich, needs to be part of that conversation. But whoever it is, hopefully they got that plan in place.
So Taco Bell is at it again with another invention, if you will. B-Train's already shaking his head. This one sounds good, though, fellas. I may take one for the team on this one. So Taco Bell is testing 2 new products. One of them includes a massive Cheez-It as a tostada. Grose, yeah, I see you're in on this one as well. Imagine a massive Cheez-It topped with all the fixings of a tostada: beans, beef, cheese, lettuce, wrapped in a grilled tortilla. Grose, I'm starting with you. You're not pumping the brakes on this one, right?
No, let's go, Sean Crespin. You and me. We'll go hit the local Taco Bell and we'll test drive it and tell everybody how it goes.
Absolutely. Now that right now we'd have to travel to Irvine, California, because that's the only place they're testing this as of right now, but they're expected to roll it out later on this summer nationwide. So B-Train, when that happens, are you rolling with us?
No, I'm not rolling with you, and I'm not going to be anywhere near you guys an hour or so after you eat that. So just know those things usually don't end well.
It's a giant Cheez-It. I'm in. Sorry, you. Okay. Yeah, I'm in. 100% in on that. Last one here, real quick. A little pop culture. There was a new poll. You guys know I love my polls of the biggest summer dating turnoffs. Okay. Pump the brakes or not, that this particular turnoff should be at the top of the list. And tell me if this is truly a fashion faux pas. Socks and sandals. Is that okay? Is that okay? No, no? Come on now. Socks and sandals, not okay? There's never a situation where socks and sandals is okay?
No. It's never okay. Never. Not even in the winter. No matter what season it is, it's not okay.
All right, hang on a second. So it's the winter. Let's go right there. We're talking about summer turnoffs, but let's go to the winter. It's freezing cold out. You got to take the trash out, right? You got to take the trash out. You don't have shoes on because it's nighttime. You're at the house. You don't just slide.
You got slippers. You got house shoes that cover the feet, man. No, don't do that. Don't do that to yourself.
The other biggest, apparently, summer turnoff, so keep this in mind as you're out there this summer. Top 10 included bad tan lines like farmer's tan, gross, sunburns, branded T-shirts, so don't be rocking the branded T-shirts. Mosquito bites, try to keep those up. Cheesy pickup lines, which we're about to do cheesy jokes here in a moment here with B-Train's dad jokes, so I don't know why that's on the list. But being a downer or just unenthusiastic. I like that one. Being a downer, just have some fun, for Christ's sake. Come on now. Don't be Debbie Downer. Don't be the guy that ruins the vibe.
Fun.
Yeah, but I mean, that's year-round, though. You don't want to be Dougie Downer ever in the winter, fall, spring, or summer. That's never a good look.
So officially, never an okay moment to have socks and sandals. All right, we're pumping the brakes on that. All right, so the specs are on. Time for B-Train's Dad Joke of the Week to wrap things up, as we do each and every week. There is an official grading system here on the show if you're just joining us for the first time. No matter what, after he delivers his dad joke, he's going to get one of them. Now, if it's a solid dad joke, follow it up with some laughter, right? Of course, because it's funny, so we're all laughing. If it's above and beyond, you're going to get the standing ovation. That's for jokes we're all going to tell our friends tomorrow at the office. But there is that there's a possibility. It's happened before where the joke just doesn't land, and the official that did not work out sound of the show might have to play if it just doesn't land for this week. So B-Train, take it away.
All right, here we go, fellas. Why did the Little Mermaid need singing lessons?
Why?
She's always singing under the sea.
You got it.
The studio audience liked that one, B-Train. Good job.
Came through in the clutch, brother. You know, hey, I'm on a roll, man.
There you have it.
Wow.
There you have it.
Wow.
Hey, that's going to about do it for this week's edition of Training Gross. Real quickly, follow us on Twitter. Last week, Sean, you asked a question. I forget the exact nature of it, but Krispy Kreme and ice cream came. They were doing. Anyway, we did a Twitter poll on that. Krispy Kreme actually liked our Twitter poll question. So our listeners weighed in, and they will try the Krispy Kreme ice cream. I think B-Train and I said no. Our listeners disagreed. So we'll throw something out there maybe about the Taco Bell invention and see if they're on board with you and me, Sean, or if they agree with B-Train.
Come on.
I'm going to give it a shot. Maybe we just take a run over to Irvine and front run this whole thing, Sean.
You got it. I'm in.
Maybe just clear out your schedule for the rest of the day after you eat that, too.
Maybe clearing out something.
Maybe we do that. For B-Train, Sean Crespin. We'll see you on the next edition of Train and Gross.
We'll holla.